Praise the Lord. We're going to read Genesis chapter 29, 11 to 18. Jacob gets first choice. And it says, And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well favored. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. Again, reading verse number 11, it says, And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice, and wept. What was the reason why Jacob was weeping? Rachel was not weeping, nor were any of those in Laban's household were weeping. The reason, it seems, is because of the fact that he had to set off away from his own dad's household for the first time in his life. And it was due to also what he had done to Esau by stealing his blessing. So he was a bit distraught in being away from them. And of course, the threat that Esau had against his own life. So the journey itself was done alone, and he was not with anyone. He might have been wondering whether he would really make it to the right place, but the faith in God he had. However, as all men would, they would wonder if he would meet thieves or someone or some crowds of people that might do him wrong. Nevertheless, he was not met with anyone of that nature. God had protected him along the entire journey. Even so, he felt enormously relieved that he had gotten to the right house, and the fact that, at looking at Rachel and knowing why he had actually come to their house, which he did not mention to Laban at the outset, was for him to find a wife. And Rachel, according to Jacob's thinking, no doubt at that time, said or thought that she fit that bid very clearly. Not only in looks, but it must have been, but also in character. Thus, his voice of crying is one of relief from being so overwhelmed and distraught, but at one that point he seems safe and grateful. For it was also the fact that Esau was planning to kill Jacob, so that might have been in his mind. Thus he may have wondered if Esau had noticed that Jacob was fleeing, and whether he would be found and possibly caught and killed by Esau. But it could have been others on the way that he might have been afraid of just as much, with that thought of Esau wanting to kill him in mind. In Genesis 27:42 it says, And these words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah. And she sent and called Jacob her younger son, and said unto him, Behold, thy brother Esau, as touching thee, doth comfort himself, purposing to kill thee. So those words were not a comfort, obviously, to Jacob. Rachel might have been a little overwhelmed with Jacob's emotion. One questions Rachel's age at the time. If she were not of marrying age and a preteen, he probably would not have shed such emotion. However, if she were more as an adult age, he could have. Barnes's notes on the Bible holds that Jacob was 84 when he got married. Thus, that puts Jacob at 77 years of age when he had met the entire family of Laban. However, another puts Jacob at 71 years at the time he had met Rachel, so he would have been 78 years upon marriage. to both Leah and Rachel. Rachel, the one whom he had desired to marry at the beginning, could have been up to 22 years of age at meeting Jacob, most likely, and 29 years of age when finally getting married to Jacob. In verse 12, it says, And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. Jacob was extremely happy to have met them, for it was the first time that he had met his relatives there in Haran, as Isaac, Jacob, and Esau were all born in the land of Canaan, and they had never met any of their relatives in Haran, except that Isaac's wife, Rebekah, was brought from Haran. But Abraham had not wanted Isaac to go out of the land of Canaan and to return to Haran, and Isaac stayed in the land of Canaan his entire life. It can be said assuredly that God must have kept Leah and Rachel from marrying anyone in Haran for the purpose of getting married to Jacob. Usually, women back then probably got married much younger than even now. However, when Leah and Rachel had met Jacob, they were probably in their 20s. Therefore, they were of marriageable age, probably since they were 16 or so back then. The question was, why is it that they had not gotten married? Was it due to the fact that Laban was really strict and wanted them to have the right husband? Or was it just God preserving them for Jacob? Of course, we know not the reasons why they were held off from marrying. It may have been due to the fact that Laban did not see anyone there within Haran a good match for his expectations. And maybe God put it in the mind of Laban that they should wait. Jacob had expressed who he was to Rachel and the family. Rachel was then very excited, for one may think that in all reality there might have been some kind of connection of love at first sight, though, of course, the Bible does not record it. That moment for both Jacob and Leah was probably a connection of some sort regarding love. Jacob must have fell deeply in love with her at first sight and at knowing her character too. Yet Jacob was not versed in the fact of the custom there in the region being different. He probably had never realized anything of the custom and may have thought that Laban could have made an exception anyhow due to the fact that he was a relative. Rachel had run to tell her father. It must have been that Jacob had stayed with the sheep while Rachel had run off to tell her father of Jacob's presence. Since Jacob was already about 77 years old, it follows that Laban must have been close to 117 years of age, for he was Rebekah's brother, that is, Rebekah being Jacob's own mother. Rebekah did not give birth unto Jacob after her until after her marriage for 20 years. Thus, the reason why Laban must have been so much older than Jacob, if that were the case, Laban at 117 years of age, and if Rachel were 22 at the time of seeing Jacob, then Laban had Rachel um, while Laban was the age of 95. Uh, Abraham had mentioned that it was that he was past childbearing age, yet even Laban had children. It must have been at such a later time of life, and instead of being Jacob's brother, as the biblical account says, it probably means that because that is how they had addressed themselves back in those days. However, today we would mention the relationship as uncle and nephew, Jacob being the nephew, which seems quite strange at his age for us today, anyhow. Since they must have lived to about 150 at that point, Laban probably had another 33 years or so to live. Thus, it never mentions about Laban's age, nor does it specify Jacob's age. But Jacob was quite older in comparison to Rachel. Yet Rachel even dies before Jacob passes away. Thus Rachel herself, if she were 22 years of age at that time of meeting, which was probably a high figure, she had married at the age of 29, had stayed in Haran with Jacob until she was 42. And at the time of Jacob's departure from Haran, entering into the land of Canaan, and that, of course, is when she had died giving birth to Benjamin at about 42 years of age. Very young, considering the time span of ages back then. Therefore, she had been married to Jacob for only 13 years and had passed away giving birth, of course, to Benjamin. So Rachel's life is quite short, but then again, we have to think that she was the one who stole the gods from her father Laban. And Jacob was the one who said, if if these gods be found in any of them, let them die. Well, they weren't found, but maybe God had just put that into action of her life because she was pregnant at the time, and then she only went further on, and by the time that she got into the land of Canaan in the area of Bethlehem, she gave birth, and giving birth to Benjamin caused her death. So her passing away was extremely sad because Benjamin, of course, was a son that never saw his mother, and Joseph had not been with Rachel that long either. So the time of their marriage between Jacob and Rachel was quite short, 13 years, and that's it for one of the probably one of the most intriguing um, relationships between a man and a woman in the Bible. Yet the expectation was grand once they had met, but the trouble soon came 13 years later. In verse 13 it says, "And it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things." So when it says he told Laban all these things, what kind of things does he tell him? Laban is also caught running to meet Jacob. For a man that is probably somewhere around the age of 117, running off to meet Jacob was, as was known by him doing so, an important meeting. Yet that elderly man was running off. One, what one must have said, amazing. However, the Bible does not even give any second thought to it. It almost sounds as though it were common for the elderly to run as Laban did. Besides, Jacob was one of the family, one of wanting to see his own sister's son. That was intriguing enough. It's surprising for him to have his sister's son down there, or there, up there. Back then, of course, they did not have a way to communicate long distances, except possibly they had sent servants to send a message. However, Laban had probably not heard from Rebekah or the circumstances of his own sister since she had left for the land of Canaan. Of course, we don't have any information about it, but that could be. And that was probably when she was perhaps 17 or thereabouts, Isaac being 40 years of age. Thus, it had to have been the entire age of Jacob at least, that Laban had not heard anything, or if he had, it was through servants. Yet he had never met Jacob either. Thus, at Jacob's age of 77 years, most likely, plus the 20 years that Rebekah had been barren, that would have put the timeline at about 97 years that Laban had not seen or possibly heard anything about Rebekah. Thus, it was close to 100 years that Laban had not heard nor seen anything of his own sister, nor her children, nor knowing anything about them, at least as far as we know. Therefore, that is probably no doubt the reason why Laban was running to see him, greet him, and inviting him in. However, that does not look good on his trickery with having him marry Leah, especially since Jacob was his nephew. But in the back of Laban's mind was probably the thought that this was his opportunity to have both his daughters married to the right person. For there was not much time left, shall we say, for him to find them a husband. Laban had easily shared his home with him and wanted Jacob to feel at home. It may be at that time, of course, that Jacob was sharing all of the good news of home in the land of Canaan about his father Isaac, that Laban had never met, his marriage with Rebekah, Laban's sister. Furthermore, his brother Esau, maybe the trouble that had happened back home, though it's a possibility that he didn't share the negative portions with Laban about his brother Esau, so that he would continue to look good in the eyes of Laban. That's a possibility. For in doing so, because he had deceived his father, Laban might have also taken some precautions in hearing that Jacob had deceived his father. That would not have looked good on him, nor on Jacob's reputation, there at least. In verse 14 it says, and Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. This saying was said by others in the scripture too, but before Laban it was said, Adam had said that about Eve in Genesis 2:23. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. Others after Laban had also said it. David had said it to Judah in 2 Samuel 19:12-13. Ye are my brethren, ye are my bones and my flesh, wherefore then are ye the last to bring back the king. And say ye to Amasa, Art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? God do so to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. The Israelites said it to David in 2 Samuel 5:1. Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. What it sounded like is the fact that Laban was generous for Jacob to stay with him. Jacob had the purpose of seeking a wife, but that was not mentioned yet up to that point. Jacob was probably speaking to the daughters of Laban and analyzing which one he liked the best and would choose as a wife in the meanwhile. So his experience was much different than Isaac's. Isaac got a wife, no other choice, but it was a good choice for him. God made that choice, basically. But Jacob had the opportunity to choose which one he wanted. Well, at least in his mind, he did. But he also spent time with them in the same house before he got married to them. 7 years. So he might break the news that he were interested in one of them, and that, of course, was Rachel. In verse 15 it says, And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? Laban wished to provide Jacob with some type of payment. Laban might have had servants too, but Jacob was different. His daughters were probably helping Laban also, but again, Jacob, he believed, deserved payment, while his daughters possibly did not need it, for all was theirs of his anyhow. Instead of stating any payment monetarily, Jacob mentioned um, his desire to get married to Rachel. And the idea is there was kind of like a dowry, a mofar, I think that was called, which was provided to the father of the bride, but Jacob did not have any money. And since the idea of wages had come up, he decided to offer 7 years of work for her. Laban was happy for Rachel, did need a husband, and it was a delight that Laban had heard the news that Jacob was interested in Rachel as a wife. What is not said is the fact of Rachel or even Leah's feelings concerning their marriage to Jacob. Rebecca had mentioned that she would go and marry Isaac, but the feelings of the two, Leah and Rachel, are not provided at all, especially when Leah is put in Rachel's place, how Leah must have felt about it, and Rachel too. However, they both seem to be genuinely obedient to their father, even though um, Laban was not a really good person at what he was doing at that moment, at least. The one who had probably felt the most awkward was Leah, toward her sister, toward Jacob, for being put in Rachel's place. Kind of an embarrassing situation. Yet she made it through life without any bitterness, at least written in the Bible, towards her father, for she may have thought it good in any case to marry Jacob. In verse 16, and Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, the name of the younger was Rachel. Moses introduces the two daughters of Laban for the reader. So it says the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Though we are not explained their ages, it is assumed that they were not very far apart in ages. We are also not introduced to Laban's age either, or even Jacob's age at the time of arrival. The Hebrew origin of Leah's name means either weary, delicate, or even grieved. Of Rachel's name, it means ewe or a female sheep. It symbolizes sacrifice, gentleness, or purity. Verse 17 says, Leah was tender eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well favored. When it mentions that Rachel was well favored, one knows the history that Jacob had favor towards her above Leah. Yet the question remains whether that well favored meant also for her family, for her sister, for the city in which she lived, of her grandparents. Most would look at a beautiful woman, even at the age where she is marriageable, and favor her. Sometimes that beauty may cause others to look beyond her and not notice her shortcomings. However, it is true that it seems within her character there does not seem to be such shortcomings. She seems to be very personable and amicable too. Of course, one notices more what the character of a person is when they have received an injustice. Jacob was furious over Laban providing Leah, when all in reality he was doing his best to please Laban and the household too. Yet he got tricked into marrying Leah. Not in any way his fault, but it was indeed a lifelong thing, a trickery that lasted into Jacob's entire life. Thus, he would have a wife that he did not choose. Yet, he did get over it. And Leah was the one that God had chosen to produce more of the male children for Jacob to be a part of Israel, even Judah too. Leah was tender eyed, which may have meant that in contrast to her sister, she did not have quite the beauty that was attractive. Though she may have had less brightness in her eyes, as brightness may have inspired others. Her eyes, further, may have been soft and delicate to look at, more on the idea of relating to her character too. That term may have also been a way for Moses to not bring any negativity to her looks. But her but she was not as beautiful as Rachel, even in the eyes of Jacob. In verse number 18, and Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. With Rachel's beauty analyzed, and probably her character very appealing for Jacob, he had first choice for the wife of the daughters of Laban. In fact, Rachel was the first one that he met, too. And he was definitely intrigued, maybe already in love from that first moment. That for him was a blessing, for the others in the city might have wanted to choose Rachel, but their custom was the elder first, and they may not have been interested in Leah. And that is the reason why Rachel may not have been married out either. It was God's way, maybe through culture and through the fact of giving Leah her tender eyedness in order to keep others in the city at bay and provide Jacob for its choice. Thus Jacob felt obliged to provide Laban with 7 years of work to get Rachel as his wife. That was in part a way of Jacob saying to Laban and to Rachel that she was worth working for that long. That is what love does too. May God bless you in Jesus' name.